We all want our Sunday schools to be absolutely top-notch, the best they can be. In this video, we're going to talk about what is it we really want. What do we want as leaders of the Sunday school program? What do we want as teachers on Sunday morning? And what do the kids in class want? We're going to slice the typical Sunday school hour up like a pizza, and we'll look at each piece to see how all of this comes together to achieve what we want to achieve in our Sunday school. I'm Tom Finley, a 25-year children's pastor. I learned a lot during those years, and I want to share them with you. Before we jump in, bear in mind that this is video number 2 of a 3-part series of very basic truths about children's ministry, especially today, Sunday school. Now, as the leader of the children's ministry, I wanted results in Sunday school. I wanted to see discipleship. I wanted to see kids with life-changing decisions to follow Jesus Christ. So I did 5 things that affected the Sunday school hour. I should tell you at this point that before I became a children's pastor, I was the managing editor of the youth department at a major Sunday school publishing company, and so I felt confident in writing my own curriculum. It's not something I'd recommend for you, but it is available, and I'll tell you where in a little bit. Now, the first decision I made was to go through the Bible cover to cover, taking all the classic stories that kids love, starting with the book of Genesis, going through the Old Testament, going through the Gospels, going through some of the book of Acts and the final pages of the book of Revelation. But basically, it became a 2-year course, Old Testament, New Testament. The third thing I did, and this is super important for discipleship, is even though we were studying Old Testament or all over, we were talking about Jesus. It has to be about Jesus. Now, when I first got into the business of being a writer, I got published by a publisher called Youth Specialties, and Wayne Rice, who is just a fantastic guy, told me, here's the secret, Tom. Nobody wants to hear about anybody except Jesus. They all want to hear about Jesus. It was great advice, and it's got to be the way it is. So even though we're talking about Noah or Abraham, somehow we want the lessons to really kind of focus on the Lord. This is how kids grow to admire Jesus. And when you admire somebody, you're going to stick with them. Also, I wanted tons of review because that's how we learn. So every 5th lesson became a review of the previous 4 lessons. Also, the lessons themselves, if they had, say, 3 Bible learning activities, each activity was basically on the same point. Now, in reality, I wasn't super hardcore on that, and a lot of the lessons, they do go in different directions a little bit. But basically, if you taught the Bible story and 1 activity and then the place burned down and everybody ran home, you were successful. And that was a great thing to tell teachers that were new and a little nervous, and I'd talk to them afterwards and they'd say, as they're looking at their shoes, I didn't finish the lesson. We didn't get to the conclusion. Hey, not a problem. As long as you did the Bible story and maybe 1 activity, you did the thing. Also, in a couple of weeks, there'll be a review lesson. The final thing I did is really pretty radical. I've never heard of any curriculum company doing it because it's a terrible business plan. And that is, you teach through the Bible, Old Testament, you teach the Gospels and whatnot the 2nd year. And then you rinse and repeat, and you keep repeating every 2 years as the kids grow up in the level of maturity in the lessons, all right? So theoretically, if a kid showed up every Sunday from preschool to graduation of elementary, they get the same story 8 times, 4 cycles of 2 years, plus they get the review lessons. By the time they get out, they know the Bible really well, and because we're talking about Jesus, they understand who Jesus is and how awesome he is. And that's a great way to start going into middle school and the rest of life.
I'm a pastor of adult ministries, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this, but I think my kids know the Bible better than most of the adults that attend our church. But most importantly, they know Christ, and they really have this incredibly well-balanced and biblical version of who Jesus Christ really is.
In my church, there was a guy named, he was a doctor. His name was Ken. Dr. Ken was on our worship team. I think he was the worship leader. He's since moved away. But one day he came to me and he said, Tom, this thing happened. I got to tell you about it. We were driving in the car, my son and I. He was in the back seat, and we were listening, as we often do, to the Bible on the sound system. And when it got to the story of Samson, my son says, I know that story. And so I thought, I'm going to give him a test here. So I turned it off, and I said, okay, tell me the story. Tom, he told that story in such detail, and Ken was a guy of the Bible. He was really into the Bible. He said, I didn't know if he was actually right or not because he was so detailed. There were things he was saying that I'd never thought of or heard of. So I turned it back on, and sure enough, he was right. Well, I heard stories like that fairly often during those 25 years I was working this. So yeah, if you can do that, that's the way to disciple kids, because when those kids leave, they not only know the Bible, they know Jesus. Now, let me tell you, if you have a curriculum that's spending 5 weeks in the Old Testament doing something, and then a 13-week course on the miracles of Christ, and then back to somewhere else, and over here and over there, the kids will know some stuff about the Bible, but they won't really understand how the Bible flows. And when you graduate out and you don't really know how the Bible works, that's a real deficit. So if you can, you want to do everything you can to make that Bible right from cover one to the final chapters so that they understand that, hey, the Bible is a book I can comprehend. I get how the Bible works, and they'll keep going back to it in future years. If you'd like to have a look, go to kofi.com/Tom Finley, and you'll find something there for free. 5 weeks worth of 4 age levels, Sunday schools, and it'll give you an idea of what we're talking about. Let's take a look at some tips and tricks for the Sunday school hour. First of all, I like to think of the Sunday school hour as 10-minute segments, like slices from a pizza. Typically, we have 6 slices. We have welcoming time, Bible story time, 2 or 3 activities, and the conclusion. I also like to do a snack time, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And this will help us understand what teachers want and what kids want and how to give it to them. First of all, the welcoming time. As the kids arrive, do they have your attention? And even more important, well, maybe not more importantly, but very much important, is do the people who are dropping them off have your attention? Are you conversing with them? Are you talking to them and telling them what's going on and just hearing their stories, what they want to know? This is the way you grow a church. Make sure you have everything set up and ready to go as much as possible. Another responsibility you have is to make sure that the kids are socializing. There's always somebody who's a loner that just does not want to join in. They want to sit off in the corner and do their thing. If it's super important to that kid to do that, then let them do it. But as much as possible, get everybody involved in some sort of project or game or what have you, and get them to interact. That's how they make friends. That's how they feel a part of the group. As far as the activities go, that's on you. You got 10 minutes when kids are arriving. You could have somebody playing music. You could, of course, play games. If you'd like to find a source of object lessons, of icebreakers and regular games, even a couple of crafts, then check out my other YouTube channel, the Object Lessons channel. Now, in the previous pizza slice, the welcoming slice, I said, do they have your attention? When you start the Bible story, you need to have their attention. It's extremely important. Of course, you know that. There's nothing I'm telling you there. Now, my method of teaching is we might do an activity to introduce the Bible story. So this isn't a hard, fast where it is in the pizza. But once you start that Bible story, I like to make it kind of short and sweet, immediately followed by a review activity, either a team game where they're answering questions based on that Bible story, or a small group where they're playing a board game based on that Bible story, that really seems to cement the lesson of the Bible story into the hearts and minds of the kids. Snack time. Now, I love snack time, and it's not because of the snacks. It's because of what good it does, not for the kids, but for the teachers. Imagine that you're a pilot on a big airline, 400 passengers going across the ocean, and suddenly you have no engines. It's just like, ah! Would you not like to stop at that moment and just say, okay, we need a do-over. We need to start again. Let's go back. And yeah, can't be done that way. But in Sunday school, you can do it with a snack. If a teacher is getting through the lesson and just realizes the kids aren't gluing in on it, it's just not going well, the last activity wasn't terrific, what have you, a great thing to do is just say, okay, kids, time for a snack. And the teacher can regroup and get going again and have a second shot at it. And I find that this actually worked for me as well. There's many times when I just going, I think we need a snack. It can also be not because of the lesson, but because you might have a couple of kids who are just misbehaving and they just won't stop. So it's like, okay, snack. Everybody kind of regroups, even the misbehaved kids. After that, they might be just fine. Bible learning activities. This is where the kids actually do learn what it is you're trying to teach. And the most effective thing I've seen is team games. And what I mean by that is the whole class is playing a game that might be a poster on the wall that the teacher is using, say like Jeopardy or even Connect Four. These kind of games can be turned into Bible learning activities simply by saying your team gets to take a turn if you can answer this Bible question from the story. And if they can't, then the other team gets a chance. And they go back and forth. And sooner or later, somebody wins the game. This works really, really well. And I like it too because a new kid or a kid who does not feel confident in answering these questions can just hide on their team. They don't get picked out of the crowd. They don't get embarrassed. Small groups, of course, those are the table games where they have board games or card games or whatever that teach the lesson. And then there's the individual activities, which can be a coloring page or what have you. But my favorites are the first two, the team games and the small group games. Individual things we do now and then when they're called for, but not very often. Now, here's something that bugs me a lot, and I wonder if it bugs you too, and that is the conclusion. That's where in standard curriculum, that's where the application of the lesson happens. I can see the rationale. You've taught this, but if we don't respond to it in our hearts, what good is that lesson? So you need an application. Well, guess what? I've discovered that you really don't need that. In fact, conclusions cause a problem, and that is when the teacher doesn't get to it and they think, I did not apply. I didn't ask the kids to respond to what this lesson was about. I'm a failure. And I got this over and over again. So I decided, is there a way I can just not do the conclusion? If I didn't do the conclusion, if it was just another typical activity, another team game or what have you, and it didn't particularly call out an application, what would that look like? What would happen? Well, I found out something that I want you to learn, and that is the application that the teacher gives is nothing compared to the Holy Spirit bringing that application to the kids. If the kid is in there for any number of months or what have you, believe me, you're going to see kids who get it. And they get it because the Holy Spirit has opened their hearts and just said, here's the truth, and now you need to respond to it. And they do. This is why we have such a high percentage of true disciples coming out of the children's ministry. The Holy Spirit has replaced the lesson with the Holy Spirit speaking to that person's heart and mind. And it is awesome to see. So again, I would say, don't call it out as a conclusion, just do another activity. However, there are lessons that do need a conclusion application. An example would be if your church leadership comes to you and say, in a month we're going to do a baptism service, so talk to your kids to see if there's any that want to be baptized. Well, in that case, you would do a lesson on perhaps Jesus being baptized, and you need at the end to say, okay, kids, here's a form. Take this home to your parents if you want to get baptized, and talk to them, and then your parents will talk to the pastor, okay? So that's an application, right? And you need to do that. But it's not something I do every Sunday. I just keep on rolling with what we're trying to teach the kids, and I watch kids just become more and more appreciative of who Jesus is, and they stick with him. I want to say this again. If you're trusting the conclusion to be the application of your lesson, your hopes are going to be dashed most of the time, because there will be teachers who don't get there, and there will be applications that's never made. Also another thing is, in a lot of the games, the application is kind of in the game itself. Now, we've been talking about what happens when a teacher goes too long. What happens when they finish too early and you got like 10 minutes left? What I want to encourage you to do is have an emergency box full of lessons that are not lessons, but activities that you can pull out. And they're already printed. You've already printed them up and they're ready to go. Well, I'm developing those for you. So again, take a look at my Ko-fi account. By the way, the object lessons on the object lesson channel, many of them, almost all of them, have a downloadable quick lesson plan with a student activity page. So you've really got actually a lot of things that you can cobble together to make a good emergency box for yourself. I hope you found this helpful. I will see you again next time.